Hey dads, I'm June Loiza. Welcome to Dad Smarter Not Harder. Today I'm super excited to have Dave Lee from Dave Lee on Investing. And I'm having him on the channel today because he has a new channel, Dave Lee on Parenting, where he's sharing a lot of great mindsets and philosophies that are going to help not just dads, but all parents. So Dave, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, I can't wait to share with you, Gene, and your audience as well.
Great. So I'd love for you to just really quickly touch upon like who you are. Maybe I know you from Dave Lee on Investing, maybe just a little bit on that channel. Like what do you want listeners to know about you and maybe a little bit about your kids and your family situation as well?
Yeah, so currently I live in Austin, Texas. Prior, I was in California. And I have a 6-year-old boy and a 3-year-old daughter, and they have been kind of the priority of my life over the past several years. On the side, I also run a YouTube channel on investing. It's called Dave Lee on Investing. And I started that because I really wanted to leave something for my kids where I felt like investing is so kind of material focused and money focused. And I wanted to leave something for my kids that was deeper in thinking and showed a different angle on investing. And then I also run a software company. It's about 5 people or so. Since 2008, we've been making iOS, Android, and web apps. And that's something also I do.
That's awesome. I feel like a really important place to start at the root of it is where you describe your upbringing and how your parents treated you and how that has influenced your perspective on parenting and starting back, as you mentioned in your podcast, thinking from a principles first approach. So I was wondering if you could maybe just lightly, as much as you want to, touch upon your upbringing and how that has influenced your philosophy with your children.
Yeah, so I grew up in Northern California, and from what I remember of my past, I had a very traumatic past in a lot of ways. My father was very abusive physically and emotionally. My mother was largely emotionally absent. And I remember just constantly living in a state of fear and walking on eggshells. And there were many times where, when, one example is I had 2 brothers, an older brother and younger brother. And when we would fight or argue even, like we wouldn't even physically fight, it would just be arguing. My father had this policy where he would just beat all of us. And it was like crazy. It's like we didn't do anything. We were just like, trying to sort it out and arguing. And he would literally take like a broomstick or just anything he could find and literally just like, yeah, he would just, make us drop our pants and he would just go at us. And to the point where we would have bruises and we would just be bawling, begging him to stop. And this could happen at any moment in time where something would trip him off. And this was kind of the constant state of stress we were living in. And the flip side of it was my dad was actually a pastor, and a very renowned pastor, to say the least. And he, in the community where I was living, in that community, he was very, very respected. And our family was upheld as kind of like this model family. And so you saw this strange, dichotomy, and that's the tension that I grew up living in. And when I went to college, I started to just sort through a lot of the inner kind of mental, emotional trauma and mess that my childhood had left. And what I realized was like that I was really messed up emotionally, and that it wasn't going to be an easy battle. So I spent, after college, I spent almost my entire 20s. One of my main focuses was just on inner healing, trying to get emotionally whole, sort out my trauma, my past, get to a place where, I was somewhat healthy inside. But that took thousands and thousands of hours of reading books, listening to seminars, like finding just anything I could do to help in that process. And I think, yeah, through that whole kind of process of going through a traumatic childhood and then spending a decade coming out of it, that laid the foundation for, I think, how I would approach parenting when I had kids.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. And I want to fast forward a little bit. You do mentioned in your podcast that you got to a point where you didn't know if you wanted to have kids. And it looks like you looked at your friends who, instead of finding joy with their children, everyone loves their children, but many times they're stressed, they're not paying attention, all they're doing is watching TV. You were thinking there must be a better way. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process of what you thought was not working, with your friends and how you took a first principles approach with your children.
Yeah, so it's funny. When I was single, I had a lot of my friends who got married earlier and who had kids. And oftentimes they would say, Dave, and here's the other thing is I've always had this thing where like I've loved the life that I have. And as a single, like I was just really enjoying life.
Yeah.
And I was very adventuresome, always traveling, doing what I wanted to do, what I need to do. And sometimes my friends would look at me and they say, Dave, wait until you have kids. You know?
Yes,
Like
yes.
your life is going to change, right? And I looked at that, I'm like, wow, that's so strange because I know, and in the back of my mind, I'm like saying to my friends, kind of like, you know, even before you were married, you weren't very happy. You know, and now you're still not. Maybe there's a bigger issue at hand. You know, maybe it's not your kids.
Deep-rooted issue there, yeah.
Yeah, you know, people like so many parents, they blame their kids for their own lives and their own, you know, lack of happiness. It's like crazy. But yeah, I was concerned because all of my friends and all the people I knew, they were all struggling with their kids, and I had no model of parenting where I felt like, wow, I want to be like that. You know, I want to be like that type of parent. Like all my parents, I just saw a lot of tension. They're always like berating their kids and policing their kids and tired. And combine that with, you know, the childhood I had, I'm like, what the heck? You know, I don't want to touch this, you know, parenting thing. You know, I'm like, you really have to convince me, you know, that this is the right thing to do. But yeah, that was the background. And I think getting married, I was open-minded. I was like, who knows, you know, if I can find a reason and kind of, if I could crack the code of what I want parenting to be, then I would love to be a parent, but I just don't see that, right? That was my attitude going into parenting. And going into parenting, or going into marriage, it took several years actually. I think, yeah, I got married when I was like 33, but we had our first child when I was maybe 40. So it took me like good 6 or 7 years where I was just really like looking into like, can parenting be awesome? Like that was the question, you know? Like, can parenting be a joy? Can I live a better life than even when I was single? And like, can it just blow me away? Like, is there something that everyone is missing, at least around me, that I know? And so I started to dissect kind of what is parenting and what is a relationship with my kid. And I started to get that sense. And I'm like, I think I know what's going on. Like, I think people are misunderstanding parenting. They think it's this authority figure as a parent trying to manage and control the behaviors of these lower kind of peasant, I don't want to say peasant, but lower kids. And it's this constant police type of structure. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me, you know? Because when I look at it in the bigger picture, one of the things I try to do sometimes is I try to zoom out, like not just 5 years or 10 years, but I try to zoom out like just historical, you know, just really far out. And I started to think like, you know, our lives are quite short. And in some ways, you know, it's in the bigger picture of time, my kids are younger than me, only a short time. They're going to be adults very soon in the bigger picture. I have a small window to help them in their bigger kind of life and journey. And what is my key relationship, my key role with them? And I started to really understand that my key role with my kids is not to police them, berate them, manage them, punish them, reward them, anything like that. My key role is actually to be a true friend, to be a person that they can trust and that like can coach them and support them along the way and can really be that kind of unconditional support and love in their life. And when I got to that, I'm like, okay, let's work backwards from there. You know, how can we base an entire parent-child relationship on kind of this concept of true unconditional support, love, friendship, and what does that look like in, you know, real life? And so that was kind of the foundation of how I kind of redefined or started to redefine what parenting is.
So there's so much of your philosophy that I love, but I would love for you to maybe a bit more expand on what you describe as friendship when we talk about things like, hey, you got to brush your teeth, you need to eat your vegetables, you need to get ready in the morning. So I wanted to get your perspective on these things.
I guess the first kind of point I would make was is imagine if you didn't have to deal with the behavioral issues with your kids. Meaning, imagine if they were making correct decisions, healthy decisions, like they were brushing their teeth on their own, they were eating vegetables because they understood, that the health impacts of food and various types of food. And they were able to get up in the morning and get themselves ready. And they were able to come downstairs and, work on projects even on their own somewhat. But imagine if the behavioral issues that most parents that occupy most parents' time and energy, imagine if you didn't have to deal with any of that, right? Then that would free you up a lot as a parent just to hang out with your kid, just to enjoy the kid for who he or she is, right? And just to jest with them, play with them, run with them, have an adventure with them, hear a story from them, but tell a story, right? Like that would predominantly make up 95% of your relationship with your child if all of the behavioral issues were all taken care of, right? So that's the parenting that I do. I mean, in a nutshell. So
no, absolutely.
So almost all my time with my kids is kind of that playful, jesting, hanging out, story, whatever. And the key though to the whole thing is you've got to be able to have the right strategy to manage the behavior. Where as a parent, you don't want behavior to become unhealthy or destructive, right? So most parents, what they try to do is they set up a system of, rules and punishment, bribes or whatever, or authority, different things to try to force and control their kids to behave a certain way because they're scared their kids are going to become, have unhealthy or destructive behavior patterns, right? But the reality is that doesn't work because you're having to constantly enforce that over and over and over, and it's not naturally coming from the kids. You have to continually be a nuisance. You have to continually remind them and tell them what to do, right? And that's the draining part of parenting that as we shared before, all my friends were doing, and then I didn't want a part of, basically, right? And so it comes down to kind of, if I am a true friend and a true coach, let's say through the situation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach my kids how to think through different decisions so that they can understand what is a good decision, what is a healthy decision, and what is not. And then they can make their own decisions with that behavior. So for example, you talk about brushing teeth. And so that's actually a quite easy one where, we just share from a very young age with our kids, brushing teeth is always your decision. You don't have to brush your teeth, Whatever you do, it's going to be your decision. I'm not going to force you to do anything in life, basically, because you are your own person. And my kids strongly believe that they make their own decisions. They decide what to do. They're their own person. But what I do share is I say, hey, let's talk about the pros and cons of brushing your teeth, and what happens to people who don't brush their teeth. And imagine if you don't brush your teeth for 1 year or 10 years, and then I might show them, and then I might say, hey, do you want to watch some videos of some people who don't brush their teeth? What happens to their teeth? And so we might watch some YouTube videos of some kids who have some crazy, teeth that have completely rotted and they need surgery or something. And my kids are just like, really? What's going on? Right? That's crazy, right? But it isn't a one-time thing. Like a lot of parents, they're so impatient. They're just thinking, oh, I just need to tell one thing and then the kids will get it. See, the mentality and the psychology of kids, and this is probably one of the most important type of keys that unlock a lot of these things, is people have to understand kids have a different way to view everything. Their psychology is based on the now. It needs to make sense right now, not tomorrow or 100 years. Like they're specialists on if it's beneficial to them right now or not, right? That determines a lot of their behavior. As parents, what we could do is we could help them expose themselves, their thinking, to various time frames of consequences to their behavior. They say, hey, you might not, I don't want to brush my teeth sometimes, but, and it feels good not to brush my teeth if I think about it right now, but there's also this time frame of next week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years down the road. And if you continue to not brush your teeth, here are the impacts and consequences of that. And it's amazing how smart kids are. Like kids really are able to, it's not natural when they're young to think upon multiple time frames, but they understand it actually because they're so smart. Kids are geniuses generally, and they can understand that, and then they can adjust their decisions they make in the now based upon what you've shared of these different time consequences. Eventually, the kids get better over time with age, but also with understanding to incorporate multiple timeframes into their decisions. This is why, for example, brushing their teeth is a cinch for my kids. Like eating vegetables, they love vegetables. Like they'll eat up broccoli and green beans and all sorts of stuff because it's like they're convinced. They're really convinced of the impact of their food knowledge is so advanced. As a 3 and 6 year old, they understand carbs and proteins and fats and vitamins and different impacts of vegetables versus meats and all sorts of stuff, and they have internalized it, and they really want to eat what they want to eat. If I want to try to force my kids to have candy, like I'm gonna have a hard time actually. It's crazy. Like if I want to give them candy or something like a Coke or something, they'll be really struggling because they've internalized themselves an entire decision-making process that's based upon multiple time frames that when I say, hey, just eat sugar, just try it like completely, just a whole, cup of sugar, just try it. They're conflicted because they understand like so much about, that issue. So, but yeah, I mean, the more I talk about it, the more I realize this is just, it seems kind of crazy.
So Dave, this is great. What you're talking about is you're teaching the principles that we want to eat healthy because, and these are all the reasons, we want to live longer, we want to have more energy, we don't want our teeth to rot if we're eating all these sweets. You're basically teaching, and then let them make their own decision.
Well, just to
go ahead.
Slightly interrupt is, it's actually, so the way I approach it, I don't say, oh, we need to eat healthy or, whatever. Because a lot of times that's a moral push. And it's something like we're teaching them what they need to do or what they ought to do. And kids resent that. I mean, these guys are independent, like folks, strong-minded kids. They resent when we push stuff on them. So rather than that, absolutely. I say, hey, you guys can eat whatever you want, obviously. Like everything is about, I mean, they're able to do what they want to do. But it's like, what does this food do to people's bodies, right? And let's look at what happens when you eat just carbs and lots of sugars, and what happens to the body. And let's watch some videos, on diabetes and what that can happen and how the body, deals with all that. And I'm not telling them what to do though. That's the thing. That's it. I think that's what a lot of parents have, this angle of like, oh, I need to teach them, tell them what to do. But I'm not telling them what to do at all, Because once you tell them what to do, a lot of kids resent it and they'll do the opposite. Because they're trying to find, independence from that. And to have the parent on them saying, do this, I'll be like, forget it, like get away from me, right? So it's just human nature, right? We want to discover what we want. And that's the thing. When we teach them just basic consequences, like teach them just natural like action consequence and what other people are experiencing. That's one of the great things is like there's so much information and illustrations and videos, examples out there of, for example, cleaning up, toys or something, right? At the end of the day, a lot of kids struggle with, but our kids in a lot of ways, they are so in touch with the reality of what happens when you don't appreciate kind of cleanliness, and when you just kind of are lazy and let things pile up. And the reason is because we don't force our kids to clean up per se. We will try to say, I'm cleaning up, let's clean up, whatever. But it's always up to them. It's their choice. But if they're really lazy, let's say one day or something, they don't want to clean up, I'm basically saying, yeah, you don't have to clean up. Actually, I'm not going to clean up then. Let's be a family that doesn't clean up. And not just today, but for the rest of the year and for the next 10 years. Let's be a family that doesn't clean up because we don't want to clean up. What do you think is going to happen? And then they'll be like, and we discuss this stuff. What's going to happen if we're a family doesn't clean up, for 5 or 10 years? And then we might watch some hoarding videos. There's some great videos on YouTube on hoarders, right? Who have houses that just completely to the top with rats and mice and infestations and just like, and videos where the police have to come and like tear down the house because it's so infested. And my kids like love these videos too, because they're like, wow, that's, yeah. But over the years, it's not a one-time shot either. This has been over many years of just dialoguing and sharing where my kids completely get it. Like they're the ones who want things, clean because they understand, there's more consequences than just, what meets the eye.
So I want to make this very actionable so that people listening can really implement it in their home. It looks like, so one is you're not forcing them to do anything. They always have the choice, right? You can clean up, you cannot clean up. And then you want to show them what are the natural consequences of not brushing your teeth. You're going to get cavities. Your teeth are going to fall out. Not cleaning up, your house is going to be infested by rats if you never wash the dishes. And it looks like you use a tool, right? YouTube, whichever one watches, to take that opportunity to say, hey, let's find out what is the consequence. Is it maybe like a natural consequence of not brushing your teeth? So am I correct, Dave, that you would, in this sense, if you don't want to brush your teeth, that's completely fine. But let's take a look at what's going to happen to your teeth, and you would show those videos. Is that kind of the tangible action that you would take?
Yes and no. So here's the thing. As a parent, I want them to brush their teeth. I want them to clean their toys, etc. And so in my mind, it's not an option where I'm just going to let my kids not brush their teeth, right? Mm-hmm. Or not clean up. In my mind, like I am very strong-minded where I want to see my kids have healthy habits, right? So one example is my kids brush their teeth every day. I don't think they've missed a day. But my kids have always cleaned up together with us. I don't think we've missed a day. Maybe we might have missed a day, right? Like this is stuff that I want to see happen. But the way it comes out, the way it leads to that kind of ultimate goal is it's a complicated thing where on one hand, they do have the right to not clean up, really. And I give them that option to not clean up. But I pair it also with this discussion and this discovery of what that action means, not just for them, but for our family. So for example, a lot of times I apply it to our family. I'm like, so let's be a family that doesn't clean up. Nobody cleans up, right? Because a lot of times kids need to know that their actions also, impact others. Like for example, if someone is punching somebody, then I go, hey, do you want to be a family that punches each other? Let's try it out. Like what's going to happen, right? And eventually, like if you actually take that and illustrate it out, like what's going to happen if we're a family that punches each other every day, all day, like the puncher in the family is not going to want to punch anymore, And so a lot of times is rather than trying to suppress it and say, you're a bad boy or girl, stop hitting, right? What happens is that has the opposite effect. First, you're giving your kid a lot of shame. Second, you're breaking the relationship, saying, oh, I don't, like the kid internalizes as saying like, oh, you don't like me. My parents don't like me anymore, And it's like, something's wrong with me. And then there's this resistance against it. And then the behavior usually doesn't even stop, right? There's very little pro to do that approach, like berating your kids to stop, hitting or something. But when I tell my kids, hey, you want to hit? Hey, you can hit, but I'm going to learn from you and everyone's going to learn from you. Let's be a hitting family and let's try it out. Let's hit each other and just do it all day. And what's going to happen? But part of it is my kids have been trained for so long is they understand, like they know exactly what's going to happen, like over multiple time consequences. So they're able to adjust their actions, right, to what they want to do. And so when they stop hitting, it's really they want to stop hitting. Like no one has berated them, shamed them, or scolded them, or punished them, or any way, right? And so it's the approach is, I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to completely or to share because for me it's so intuitive and it's so effective. It just works, and my kids love it. And I've never had to punish or berate or force my kids. They just do the right thing because like I'm helping them, but in a way where they feel empowered to do it, to actually make that decision.
I think what you're really highlighting is you're instilling that intrinsic motivation in your kids. If you weren't around, they would still brush their teeth. If you weren't around, they will still clean up. So my question is, you said you as a father want your children to clean up. You want your children to brush their teeth. You want them to eat their vegetables, but you're not forcing them. And they truly do have the option of not doing it. But you have raised them in the way now they have the intrinsic motivation where they will eat their vegetables and you don't have to force them to do it. At what age did you start this? And I assume, like as you mentioned, you probably started this very, very young. But with a 1.5-year-old, my youngest daughter, like she'll scratch Juniper's face, and I tell her, hey, there's no scratching here. I explain it to her, but of course, like she's so young still that it's still a repetitive process. You just got to keep doing it. Was that your approach? Was it just constantly telling them about these guiding principles since a young age, over and over again, and eventually you reap those rewards? So it's kind of like you're investing in them early, and then kind of like when we invested, you invested much earlier in Tesla than I did, but you invest early, and then in 1 year, 2 years, now your children are 6, you've reaped those rewards. Is that how it's worked so far?
No, so it's actually a different approach here. So I'll try to explain a little bit. So when my first child, who's now 6, was just a couple months old, I had this kind of moment of realization. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is I actually view my kids as fully formed human beings that are just like, when my babies or kids came out of my wife's body, like I felt like their personalities were fully formed. It just, their mental capabilities and different, emotional things, like they weren't fully online yet. Like, and in some ways, like growing up is like about getting online, more. But in terms of personality and identity, I felt like they were always 100% there. And when my first child was just a couple months old, I had this idea. I'm like, I'm dealing with an equal. This isn't any person that's lower than me in any way. And as an equal that I respect, I need to really treat my relationship with my son as a respectful one. And so I'm like, what does that mean? I'm like, okay, what if I did no punishment? Like, how would I want to be respected as a kid, right? I would want to be like treated respectfully, I wouldn't want to get like scolded and berated and told what to do, all this stuff, I want to be treated as someone, who is capable. And so I'm like, okay, what if I did no punishment, no berating, no shame? Like, that's a huge one, no bribing, no yelling, no forcing, whatever, all this stuff. And what if I really just came alongside, him to help him with deep respect for who he is? And what ended up happening was, like, for example, you gave an example of, your 1.5-year-old scratching, let's say, her older brother. Mm-hmm. Like, both my kids had short phases where like my son would bite when he was maybe like 9 or 10 months old. And what I would do is right when he would bite or something, I would take my fingers and I would like bite him back with my fingers. But obviously not to like hurt him per se, maybe slightly less than what he did. But what I would do is, he would bite me or my wife, I would just immediately, within a second, just do a quick biting that was really uncomfortable with him. And then I would completely change the subject right away. I'd say, hey, look over there, like, or why don't you play with this toy or something? And the reason why I did this is because I knew that if I was to tell him not to bite, it would create a shame reaction where he would start to feel like, oh, something's wrong with me. Oh, my parent doesn't like me. Oh, they're trying to, tell me what to do. There's so many chain negative things that can happen once that happens. Once you start becoming into this, like telling them what to do, teaching them, morally, like this, do this, don't do that. And so this whole thing of just quickly biting and redirecting their attention a second after, and then not being angry or upset at all, not even talking about it to them, not even explaining it to them, right? This thing in like a week or two, he never bit after that. And then my daughter had this issue of scratching a little bit she was a little after a year. And when she would scratch, like I would just do the same thing really quickly, and then quickly with a smile, turn the subject to something completely different. And like, as if I'm not upset, I'm not whatever. I'm not even explaining her not to do it. Within like 2 days or 3 days, she's never scratched before, or after that again. It's so easy to fix some of these issues. But once parents get into this attitude of, oh, I need to teach them, something and tell them why it's bad and tell them, they should do this. And they're creating a whole host of issues and just shame and just resistance and tension in the relationship, when it could be so simple sometimes, to redirect or to fix some of these issues. So in a lot of ways, I guess with your question, it's like, is this something you plan? No, it's something that you actually I see immediate results. That's why I would do it. It's not something I'm just trying to see results later. It's like, no, I see my 10-year-old stopping biting within a week and never bite again, because like, it's not rewarding for him to bite anymore. It doesn't make sense. And I see that across a whole host of issues and actions. And that gives me the motivation to say, wow, oh my gosh, this is awesome. Like, it's awesome not to be able to be in contention with your child, not to be in struggle with your child, but rather to be on the same side as your kid.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds pretty crazy.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, a lot of times I think of it, I'm like, wow, it just, in some ways it just makes so much sense, but like, I just don't see people doing it. And so when I was trying it, I'm like, wow, this is incredible. It's just like, yeah, but it all goes down to the crux of, how do I want to be parented, and respected if I was a kid.
That story reminds me of one of my good friends. He said as a kid, his mother told him this story. He said as a kid, he would pull people's hair. And he said his mother tells him that when he would pull her hair, she would just quickly pull his hair, and then she said after just a little bit that he would stop doing it. And I was like, man, that sounds wild.
There's some sensitivity where you don't want to do it where it hurts them, right? Like, you want to be the parent, but just the right enough, where like they did it, but it has to be right after, because it can't be like, later. It has to be like, just a couple seconds after they're doing something, you do something that's the same thing to them where they could feel it, and then you need to redirect them so that you don't get the shame impact, right? That's really important, because shame can really just mess up a lot of the emotional development and relational development, in my opinion.
So biting, maybe hair tugging, again, it sounds crazy to me even, hearing it, but there's two examples where it's worked. Maybe I'll dig up some research to see if anybody's done any research on this, to see how that impacts, not just anecdotally, but, a broader spectrum of kids.
I think a good thing to research is actually shame. I think this is a huge topic that I think a lot of researchers are starting to catch on to. Is shame in parenting is really a big issue, and it's very destructive. And that's something that, the whole thing with berating or telling them what to do or not to do, that kids can internalize that as shame. And so, yeah, I think you could find a ton of research actually on shame.
So there's one thing with shaming and right, punishment or saying you're bad. Now the other spectrum is, we're still trying to get them to clean up their toys at the end of the day, so we don't have to do it at the end. And you give the example, right? When they're younger, a year and a half, it's like these more sensorial, quick touches. But now they're a little bit older. You can have a conversation with them. You can watch a YouTube video of what it's like on hoarders or something like that. What do you do when, let's say they didn't want to clean up? Like today they didn't want to clean up. Like you said, they have the option. Do they just not get to, or what happens from that?
Yeah, so I'll take you through a routine. Let's say it's 8 or 8:30. We're about to try to go upstairs to get ready for bed, and there's a bunch of toys. Let's say our living room is like a war zone, right?
Yes.
And as typical. And we're like, okay, let's clean up, right? And go upstairs. And let's say my kids, and oftentimes they will be like, kind of like, laying on the bed or on the sofa, like kicking back, saying, what the heck? I'm not going to clean up. I don't want to clean up, right? You clean up, right? They have a lot of ideas, right?
Yes.
Of how to avoid cleaning up. And then right now it's just to the point of, okay, guys, do you just want to, let's just leave it. Let's just be a family that doesn't clean up, and let's not clean up next week or next month and next year. And then right now my kids will start to like whine and cry, like, no, I don't want to be like that, And they'll be like, okay, fine, let's clean up. Like that's the general, thing is, and what I respect out of my kids is that because they're young, they're not able to naturally get the multiple time consequences in their mind at the same time. Naturally, as young kids, they're really drawn to the now. They need to be constantly kind of refreshed and reminded that there are multiple time consequences. So my kids are lazy, they're kicking back, not wanting to clean up. I actually look at that and go, that's very natural for kids to think that way, right? I mean, that's great. So they're just being kids. And then when I say, hey, let's not clean up and let's, just be a hoarder family, and to see their reaction of like, no, and crying, saying, no, I don't want to be like that. Let's clean up. That shows me that they're connecting the multiple time consequences, right? And that they're able to impact their current decisions based off of that, right? And so that's kind of thing. It might take like a minute or two, and the kids are cleaning up, and we got to clean the living room.
There's like a laundry list of things that parents try to get their kids to do. Going out today, it's cold outside, you should wear pants. No, I want to wear shorts. Every parent goes through that. What's your thinking behind those everyday moments when you're trying to get your child to do something? You're getting out the door, you need to go to a soccer game, I don't know, or you want to go to a friend's house and you don't want to be late because you don't want to miss the nap schedule, but they're not cooperating getting out the door. How do you get them out the door?
Yeah. So in our household, our family, there are many, many times where our kids, like are not happy. They want a certain thing that not getting or whatever. Yesterday, we found out my son's shoes were too small and we didn't have any other shoes, and he didn't want to go out, or he wanted to go out barefoot.
Perfect.
To the whole day because he didn't want to wear his shoes, and he was crying on the ground in our driveway saying, I'm like, but you can't go out barefoot. These stores aren't going to let you in. And so he's crying, saying, no, I don't want to wear my shoes, and I just want whatever. And we had ordered shoes. They're coming the next day, but, it was this big, huge spectacle outside our driveway. But a lot of parents will look at this as kind of a negative thing, right? Oh, my kid isn't being flexible, compliant. I look at that and I go, wow, my son is really strong and he has a voice, and like I really actually respect that about that. And in that situation, I'm actually like respecting that. I'm like, wow, like that's actually great, And in that process, what I don't want to do is I don't want to violate his own sacred decision-making ability. Meaning, I'm not going to say, get in the car, whatever, or else. Like, that's like the ultimately like the worst thing I could do as a parent, in my opinion. Because he has a sacred decision-making ability that is his biggest way to feel that he's independent and growing in that independence. And when I sabotage that and say, boom, that's worth nothing, his whole world is destroyed in a sense. And so what I'm doing is I'm navigating that situation where I'm trying to respect him and say, okay, what do you want to do? Okay, how about we don't go? But when I say I don't want to go, or I say let's not go, then he starts crying because he's like he wants to go. But I'm like, hey, but you can't wear your shoes in the supermarket where you're going to go. And so he's trying to find that solution himself, and I'm trying to help him along the way. I'm saying, okay, what can we do then? Okay, we don't have to go. And he cries, well, do you want to go? And he goes, oh, but I can't wear my shoes. And he's like desperately trying to find a solution. And a lot of it is like that. Like for example, if we need to go somewhere, but he's like doing something else, then it's not so much I'm going to force him to go, because that is, in my opinion, far worse than missing an event, right? Or even a dentist appointment or a doctor's appointment that we can't reschedule for 3 months. But the whole thing also is like, hey, let's leave a little early and let's help them solve this problem. And here's another thing is we're teaching our kids, like before any appointments, 3 days or 4 days beforehand, we're telling them about that appointment and explaining kind of what the appointment's about, the pros and cons, and getting their buy-in. Because we know if we don't have buy-in for that appointment, like for a doctor's appointment or something, or a dentist appointment, they're going to resist, and we're going to have tension when the day comes. And so a lot of times it's like, hey, prepare beforehand, get them on board where they're excited about, they're wanting to go. And then, a lot of times like go early and resolve the tension, like coming alongside them where like if they have some issues, some challenges and problems, before going, a lot of times they're needing to work out stuff. They're needing to solve some problems, some issues or whatever. And if they're scared, that should have been worked out a long time ago. Like I'm not going to take my kid who's scared out of his, scared out of his whatever to a dentist appointment that he doesn't want to go to. That's crazy. As a parent, I think you failed to teach your kids like about the whole experience and teaching them how to want to go, how to, why, like they need to have buy-in, without buy-in, like you can't force your kids and expect your kids not to be resentful or of your parenting, right? I mean, that's kind of the 2 cents.
I love this. And I also love that you did tell a story that your child's crying on the floor, because then we get, it's like, oh yeah, you're human too. It's not like the perfection, no, it's like you deal with it too.
My kids cry all the time.
Yeah,
My kids, they're demanding things all the time. But the cool thing is I will not violate that sacred decision making,
And I think that's the crux of it that I want to touch on a little bit right now is when parents see that happening, and even I will admit myself, in my previous self, I think I've become much better. I used to think, oh my God, my child's being so disrespectful to me. I am the adult. You need to listen to what I say. Now, what I want to get at is your mindset in that moment and how other parents can get to there. Because let's go with the assumption that most parents, for some reason, I don't know, maybe it's natural and human instinct, or it's the way most people have been brought up, they tend to think they are the authority figure. When the child is not listening to them, they're being disrespected. And then even beyond that, that the dentist appointment is more important than their tantrum right now, or that they need to be at their friends on time is more important than the child, sitting with the child. So how did you get yourself in this mindset? Are you just a patient person, or did it take a lot of, do you use certain techniques to get yourself there in that mindset if you are ever feeling frustrated or anything like that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a couple things. One thing is I really believe in this sacred decision-making kind of place that every human has. And I limit myself as a parent to not infringe on that space. And that's where I feel a lot of times punishment and bribes, but also forcing and controlling all this behavior from parents, what it does is it makes kids weak, where you're not respecting their own inherent, God-given ability to make decisions. And I think the long-term consequence and result is that you get very resentful kids, and kids who don't really trust in their parents and aren't very intimate and close with their parents. And so what I want to do is I want to build very strong, minded, determined, kids who, or adults eventually, who will stand up for what they believe and really, be strong. And as a result, what I want is, and also I personally think like that strong kind of identity is the crux of even emotional and mental health as well. And I don't want to mess all that up, And so one of my main duties as a parent is to respect that precious, decision-making power that 1-year-old or that 2-year-old or my 3-year-old has. And I'm not going to infringe on that. There's no way I'm going to infringe on that. Like, I'm going to be a parent where, my kids, they're grown up, let's say 20, 30 years in the future, and I could say with a clean conscience that I did not infringe on my kids' like sacred decision-making, ability. And I'm very sensitive with that every day. I'm like, hey, like, that's one of my main duties is to preserve that, because that's where their growth is going to happen. That's where they're going to blossom into confident human beings. They're going to blossom into capable human beings and human beings that are healthy inside out, is from that identity, right? And I don't think you can have that strong identity without that strong decision-making kind of space preserved. And as a parent, I've got to preserve that. But the whole thing about modern parenting, it actually manipulates it, where it actually doesn't respect that, autonomous kind of core decision-making space of the child, but rather in the kind of facade or excuse of management. And I think a lot of it comes from classroom management at schools. But this whole thing of, we've got to manage behavior, thus we need a system of rules, right? And we completely detach it from the essence of human development, And we become parents who buy into this modern, parenting technique or approach, which I think infringes on kids' ability to make decisions every day. And I think kids resent it. eventually, and parents get tired of it. And a large part of it is people don't know there's a different way. There's another way, right? And that's the whole thing of, if I can give anything or provide anything, it's there is another way. There is a different way to do parenting where you don't have to, emulate the obedience focused, the fear driven, all that, the control driven parenting, but you can really respect your kids and their decision making, and you can help them, right? And you can have the result is the kids are like loving it. The parents, like, I love it. My wife loves it. And it's not a chore. It's like, it's a joy. It's really like beyond my imagination how awesome parenting has been. It's invigorating. It's the opposite of tiring, actually, because I'm like playing with my kids all day, and I'm like, what can be better than playing with the most imaginative, curious human beings on earth, right? That's awesome, right? There's nothing better than that. It just spurs so much energy in me. And yeah, it's a sad thing that type of possibility isn't, shared more, or people don't know about it more. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Dave, I want to thank you for sharing, and I want to be respectful of your time as well. I think you've given a lot to me and the audience. And to end this and wrap it up, I wanted to just ask you some rapid fire questions, and you can give me a one word answer, or you can elaborate maybe a little bit. Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, the first one is: are your kids going to go to public school, private school, or are they going to be homeschooled?
Homeschooled for as long as we know. Yeah.
Sorry, actually, really quick, I do want to elaborate a little. Is it because in school it is like you're rating the kid A through B through A, B, C, D, you're punishing them, all these things. Is that the jux?
Yeah, that's just it.
Why?
I think at a certain
Okay.
age they're able to handle that and able to to navigate that. And when my kids want to go to school, and they really, at whatever age, I mean, I'm fine with that. But and each kid is different too. But yeah, schools are generally speaking very compliant focused,
Yes.
authority focused, and everything I'm trying to do with my kids is trying to build this curiosity, adventure, freedom, independence of thinking, and I'm willing and I'm willing but also able, to spend a lot of time with them to make that happen, as well as with my wife.
Great. Next rapid fire question. I'm curious about the family unit. Do you have a nanny, or do you have a grandma that comes over to help when grandma comes here, I mean, it's fantastic. But how do you kind of like set up your structure right now?
Yeah, no nanny. We've never had a nanny, never had a babysitter, never really had extended help at all. It's always just been my wife and I. And, early on I was actually thinking like a nanny would be perfect with our first kid. I was like, we have the financial resources and we could do it. It's not a big deal. And what's better than a nanny or someone to help out? And initially my wife was against it. She was like, well, I want to be more in it. And so I'm like, okay, let's try it out. I'm actually glad that we didn't hire someone in our case, just because it forced us just to go head in and just to deal with it and to embrace it. And I know other people's situation is completely different, but our situation was we had a lot of flexibility with time, and resources. So it was really a personal decision of how we wanted to use that time, right? And so
Absolutely.
we ended up just going head in. And right now it's just like, it's great because all of that initial investment or just time spent, it allows me, like, my kids are so, like, it's amazing. My 6-year-old today, this morning, he walked down after he got ready all by himself, and then he's jumping up and down, singing that he gets to go into his workroom. And in his workroom, he lays down all these pieces of paper and he draws designs of like apps and websites and different stories and different stuff. And he's so excited, and he's always late for every meal. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, he's always late because he's drawing and making something out of something. And he's always been late for so many years, And that's just, I mean, yeah, that's just awesome to me.
Yeah. I do want to highlight, and it's okay for him to be late, right?
Yeah.
Why does he have to be on time? Exactly. Like, if he's busy doing his work, let him do it. Like, you instill that ability for him to have that ownership of his time and curiosity.
Yeah. I mean, my wife at times will say she's going to eat his dinner or his lunch if he doesn't come.
Yeah.
Because she's so tempted or something. But yeah, eventually he comes.
Okay, just a few more of these rapid fire questions. Will you push your kids or advise, or however you want to call it, to go to college?
No, actually, I am like ambivalent. I think college has some great pros. I think does have some cons, but like I had a fantastic time in college, but it's their decision. I mean, especially around that time, you know, I'm confident in my kids that they'll know what they want to do, and I'll probably be supportive, you know, of whatever.
Got it. And are you trying to influence the settings around you to influence them into a certain profession, like engineering or, you know, anything else? Or are you just open-ended?
Yeah, I think no, I have no single preference in profession, but I have a very strong priority in terms of trying to make sure they're always curious, adventuresome, learning. So, you know, lots of books, lots of activities. We travel a lot, we go hiking a lot, go to new places, just continuing getting new experiences. Recently, just about 3 or 4 months ago, I started letting my 6-year-old do more. Like, we don't really do much like TV programs or even YouTube shows, but I let them do like playing around with apps like productivity apps or photo apps or messaging apps and all that stuff. And my 6-year-old he completely understands like the what an app or, you know, what an app does. And so he's been designing all these apps and he's like dying to code. He's like, I need to make this
that's so
app,
cool.
you know, and like a month ago,
that's so cool.
a few weeks ago, he was like, we're on this trip and he's like, he had this design of an app he wanted to make, and he just turned 6, which is crazy. And
so cool.
And I'm not even teaching him how to write. He just knows a few letters and stuff, but he's like crying at 9 p.m. before going to bed saying, Dad, I need to code this app. Why can't I code this app? And he's crying for like 20 minutes. And he's like, come on. It's hilarious.
That's amazing. That's honestly amazing. Okay, and this is my last question, I promise. And maybe it's not as quick, but it's a little bit deeper. I think it is great for you to be able to have freedom of time, you know, that freedom of money, to now be able to spend that time with your children or do whatever you want. Like, you're still working, right? But you're able to do it on your own time. And so many of us still have to work, you know, absolutely. So you've been able to achieve that. So now your child turns to you and asks you, Dad, how did you get there? You know, what are some of the crucial elements that got you there, or the crucial mistakes that maybe I should be aware of? Is there anything that comes to mind?
I guess what I would say is our situation is, you know, everyone's situation is obviously unique and different. In our case, because I was so reserved, kind of having kids, you know, I wanted to actually, while preparing for kids, I wanted to actually also prepare financially to be in a decent place. And that kind of allowed us to have some more flexibility while having kids. But when I look back at it, I think I'm always been a person who knows or tries to focus on what I think is the most important. And I think even without being, let's say, financially independent, I would have, with kids, actually taken some radical decisions. Maybe, let's say, you know, we just didn't have much resources. I probably would have done some stuff where like we would have moved to a low cost area, and I would have probably just really focused on my kids and probably just rearranged my whole life and lifestyle, where I would know, like, I know that there's different time periods in one's life, and you only have one chance at your kids' early lives, you know? And if I only had that one chance, I didn't have any resource, I would focus on my kids actually and try to make it work in a low cost situation or whatever, some creative ways. And knowing that perhaps a little bit later, after your kids, in my opinion, once you're like, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10, then it opens up a lot of freedom in your schedule and time where, you know, maybe I can focus on, you know, some other things at that time.
Thank you, Dave. This is super insightful. I want to thank you so much for your time. We'll have all the links to Dave on investing, where I first saw you. Also Dave on parenting, of course, to your Twitter. So, you know, the listeners can ask you any questions or anything like that. So thank you again, Dave.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks for the chat. And I wish you the best in your podcast and best to all of your audience and their journey with parenting as well.